So, um, I was thinking we could talk about design um, because I know how uncomfortable it makes Anne. So I think it's a good subject. Um, and the reason I say that is because I feel like I can convince Anne that she she shouldn't be uncomfortable about this, and uh, she probably knows more about it than she thinks she does. Um, I,
That's just social scientists. They're always scared to get their hands on anything that's like technically complex, right? It's just
yeah.
it's a thing we have in the community, and I think it's high time that we stop being scared of the technical and embrace it and use our knowledge and our theory to make it better.
So that's interesting. I would like to ask you though, why you use the word technical when you talk about design.
Yeah.
Because I've never ever, if I've ever talked about design, sorry, whenever I've talked about design, I don't think I've ever used the word technical or even thought the word technical. So I'm curious to why you went to that immediately.
Yeah, in my mind, design is like complex coding and, using like these technical applications like Figma, which is not even difficult to use based on what I heard, but it requires that kind of still like some sort of technical knowledge,
Mm,
you know?
that's interesting, especially in the context of, say, somebody who is an engineer, like a software engineer. Um, there seems to be this kind of general, I wouldn't say normal, but general view that from that side of things, that the design side is the softer, kind of more making things pretty kind of thing, and stuff like Figma or even Photoshop is just the opposite of technical. It's just all about, kind of making things look nice.
Yeah.
Um,
No, I wouldn't say that one is technical. It's more skill based.
yeah.
I really think one thing social scientists should start thinking about is skills, you know,
Hmm.
thinking of ways to kind of like bridge the theory with actual practical applications through skills. I find that that's something we don't think about or do enough, you know.
Yeah, I think that's another reason why I wanted to ask you specifically about your thoughts on design, was because I think you said something. I can't remember exactly what you said, but you said something that made me think that your views on design are very much on the kind of visual side of,
Mm.
like kind of graphic design, visual design side of things, and limited to that, um, which I think is a common thing. Um, um, how do you feel about that? If Do you think I'm wrong in saying that that's how you see design?
Hmm. But yeah, I think to me, yeah, it's visual, but also there is some theory in it as well, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, I think there's a lot of what's wrong?
Sorry. I just
What's wrong? You got
nothing.
to tell me what. Tell me. Tell me what's so funny.
I was just in my mind, I was like, are we doing this right? Are we like, is it like Anuj is all quiet? So I was like looking at Anuj. I was like,
No, it's
what?
good
I was like, what the
because
hell is Anuj thinking? Just sitting silently there. Because when Anuj is silent, I get like a little worried. So
Now,
I have a pretty good feeling of what Anuj is thinking right now,
okay.
yes,
and I'm trying to work this conversation um, to the direction where I know Anuj will explode with information. Um,
All right. All
but
right.
but but basically, I think I think because Anuj and I talk a lot about design, um,
Okay.
probably too much about design sometimes, um, and and I think one of the things that we agreed on a while ago um, was this thing, this need to kind of make it clear that design is more than that visual thing, right? Like there's like visual design, graphic design is just a type of design, right? But design in itself is something that is so broad that it almost becomes absurd to call a person a designer as a thing in itself, because when something is being made or created, and things are going now I'm thinking about what Anush is thinking about.
See, it's just so, it's like,
yeah. It's a we have to share this as a video because so people can see Anush's like folded arm gaze.
I feel so judged right now by Anuj. Okay.
But like when you think about design in this kind of really broad sense, you come to this conclusion that it's kind of absurd to call a single person, as their role in the creation of something, like that single role as the design role. You kind of come to this conclusion that everybody involved in the creation of something therefore is a designer, because they're designing in a way.
It sounds to me that we're trying to define what design is, and personally for me, I think that's such a complex concept, right? Because it's not. It can include so many different types of angles, not just visual ones. I guess I'm still kind of grappling to understand what we mean by design.
And I think that's something that so in the presentation that Anuj gave last week about design, not UX, I think another way of looking at that as well is like design, not graphic design or not visual design, because that's another thing about UX as well, is that it tends to be kind of boiled down to just being about the visual, the way the experience is influenced through the visuals. So that's how I wanted to kind of introduce this conversation.
Anuj, can you please say something?
So I think it's time for Anuj now to
yes, I think he needs
say something.
Put his input.
Yeah. What do you think of that, Anuj?
I think it's a nice day today. No, I mean, I something initially I think Annie said, which was very interesting, is, and I will sound abstract, but I will say is the tools that make somebody the craftsman person, or is the craft apart from the tool? So, for example, if somebody does not know how to use Photoshop and all the tools that their so-called designer, and even there are some like manual tools like HB pencil, like sketch and things, and it comes to a certain culture where people talk about the look and feel of certain objects that they use and the way they dress. If they're hipsters, for example, and many designers are kind of, they think we are the artists in a tech company, and they act like they're the artists in a tech company, and technical, so-called technical programmers look at designers as like, we don't think they're legitimately equal to us in this company because we are the ones actually making the thing, but they do have something we don't have. They're artists, so they also gravitate and grab onto the we are artists designers even more so, because it's something we both agree. It's like a mutually implied. Like, I as a programmer agree you're an artist, because otherwise I could have done what you do. I mean, I know how to use all the tools. It's no big deal. I mean, you might use Photoshop, but guess what, you designer? I know the code base behind Photoshop. I can design a programmer. I'm not a superficial guy using a mouse and painting. What am I, And designers are like, you're right, but at the same time, we're artists. You might be knowing how to make canvases, but we know how to paint on a canvas.
That's interesting as well, though, like that you say designers can think of themselves as artists in that way. It just using those two words made me realize something that because I've had a lot of experience in the past working in digital agencies, and a common thing in digital agencies is that you have, you know, a team of designers, right? And they'll be called designers, right? Like that's their title, designer, senior designer. But the lead of the designers is called the art director.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the title, art director. You're not the lead designer, you're the art director. Like that's the person in the company who determines how, like the visual style and all of the kind of creative visual kind of tone of everything that's done. Um, um, it's deeper than that. Sorry, it's more than just like the visual tone. It's like it's kind of concepts and um, um, just more detailed things like that. But their title is art director, and it's just interesting that underneath the art director there aren't artists. There are designers. So it's already confusing when you look at how we name the disciplines.
Fascinating. No. That's and that's so there's this character I used to love called Mr. Spock in Star Trek. When he would hear something like that, he would do this. He would be like, fascinating, with the one eyebrow, and he was not showing emotions other than that. So
I like how you can talk. You have a way of talking about Spock as if most people haven't heard of him.
That's true. Because he's my Mr. Spock. He's my Mr. Spock. The level of love I have for him. Yeah, like even today I was thinking how I will introduce my older son to Star Trek. It's important that he love it. Anyway, so yeah, and it's interesting because what happens is so much of it becomes performative when you you have to perform as an artist, so you have to have those toolkits and everything used. If somebody does not have the toolkit, they would not be a designer. And I think there's a kind of a parallel you see, not in different ways, but yeah, I'll try. So it's like in 1600, 1700, when music was Western classical music was very innovative, they started writing it down in Germany mostly and then in France because they realized it's so innovative, you will lose all the music. And I already see Anne is like, oh my God, like again, I'm not just doing his history class. So, and interestingly, when they wrote all that down, because it was innovative, it became very rigid because then it was written so people had to follow. So within that music, now it's pretty rigid, everything like that. And so this is why jazz as a form of music, some of the artists, I forget the name, the piano, who's like the pioneer in jazz, I forget the name. Anyways, he has this theory of jazz where he says jazz, it's incorrect to keep calling jazz its own form of music. It's a more of a temperamental theme that any musician can have. It's sad that it had the name because Western classical was the more proper form of music in 1910s, 20s. And the other side, which was not Western classical, but her improvisation was called jazz. But improvisation should not be its own type of music. It should be music. And improvisation is just people do when you create music, when you play music, when you just work on music. So it's just, and now it has become its own thing, jazz. But it should rather we just think of it like, yeah, bebop, but just don't think that is jazz. Anything could be jazz. Rock could be jazz. And you say Jimi Hendrix is jazz. The way he would never play the same point twice, for example. So I think so. Similarly, I think this kind of idea where we think that some people would do programming and whatever is left, the side of things which is more about connecting with humans, is design. This is why a lot of it comes from the human computer interface side of things. That whole discipline, which is not anymore that HAP used to be super hype in the 90s. And it's crazy because no matter what anybody does, ultimately there's some humans at the end or somewhere. Or what's the point of doing it? You're not doing it for aliens, right? And not yet. And so that's the thing that I think I would say a designer is anybody who's doing something to make it more, I don't know, friendly or usable is not even a good word, or kind of like thinking of a human
Would
when
you
you do
say that
something.
a designer is like a medium, sort of like how he's like translating or transporting like the back end of code and everything into like, like this other world, like the world of the user. I'm just using kind of like religious terminology to think about it. Like he's like a translator of some sort. I don't know.
No, but that's very Kantian Platonic. Sorry, no, go ahead.
It's what?
It's what?
Kantian Platonic, that kind of imagery of like back end and front end, as if there's a real world behind it. Like as if what designers do is illusion, just create all the optical illusions, and optical is the word, to make something usable for humans. Because humans, we can't deal with the real that's behind that. Programmers deal with the back end of reality.
But that leads to something. That leads to something that I've been thinking about the last few days a lot, of how it's not just the definition that can be limited. It's how we do it as well, right? So bear with me. So design now is essentially digital, right? If you're a designer, with that title, and you're not doing something digital, then you're probably going to have a very specific title, like a industrial designer.
I was thinking of industrial designer.
Yeah,
I was thinking of it.
But then you look at the definition of an industrial designer, and it's like, you're designing products, right? You kind of have to say physical products, because otherwise industrial designer should cover digital as well, right? It's kind of strange that we have these specific titles and these specific types of designer, when we seem to be unnecessarily drawing a line between the digital and the non-digital. Why don't we expect someone to be able to design something just as well that's physical as they could do something that's digital? And don't you think that because we have this separation, we then create a problem which a lot of people say we're in now, where we just make digital things, assuming that digital can solve problems that maybe it can't, right? Like we kind of automatically assume that there's an app for this, right? When designers are put in these positions where they're not asked whether the app is the best option or whether it's some sort of physical object is the better option. Because they're a digital designer, then that question is irrelevant to them. They have to solve this problem digitally. So for me, that's why I wonder things. Or I mean, lately I've been wondering, has our limited view of design been leading us into this situation where we are just solving everything with apps?
Yeah, I think it also creates like this false sense of resistance. It's like, oh, the designers, like they're the knowledgeable ones, like they're the gods. So it's like up to us, like the little people, to persuade them to like change their mindset and framework and convince them that what they're doing is wrong. But it's like, is that necessarily the case? Like, can we as like non-designers have the power to change design? And specifically, like when it comes to like resistance, I'm thinking like in terms of code, like it's so complex that like power and resistance can only be applied by someone with that kind of technical knowledge, right? But I'm kind of thinking out loud, like, is that really the case? Like, do we actually, as non-designers, have more agency than we actually think?
Can you
It's
can you help me with that? I think I need an example.
Mm-hmm. Like, for example, like you have Google and Facebook, right? And it's kind of like there's a us versus them kind of narrative going on, in the sense it's like we are left powerless, we cannot change these dynamics, you know, it's too complicated. Like the
Yeah.
way the internet works is like way too complicated. Like there's no way that an average Joe can just like
Yeah.
manipulate anything that's there, because we simply lack that technical knowledge. And I'm thinking, is there like another way to think about these kind of problems? And, you know?
Yeah, that's a good one, right? Like in the sense of not just thinking that it's too complicated. I think it's also people think that you can't change the internet, right? Not that it's too hard, like that you just can't, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that we can't change the internet because ultimately everything boils down to code, right?
Yeah.
Or the design of like these tools that we use. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see what you mean. And I think that's also like a powerful thing about having a broad understanding of what design is, because if you can separate it from the skills that you need to make something like Facebook, or to even just code, right? That's when design is really powerful, because you're kind of in thinking more in a more of a pure sense of what is the problem and what can we do to help with this problem, and you're not constrained by what you think can be done, or you know, what you think is too difficult. I mean, there's an endless list of stories about things that were invented against, you know, the public opinion of what could have been done. Don't ask me what they are, because you'll put me on the spot and I won't be able to come up with a good one. But I know there are many, because I've read about a lot of them. I think actually even I think the iPhone had a lot of, to use a cliched example, I think the iPhone had a whole bunch of technical constraints between like that other phone makers. I think Palm, was it Palm? Not Palm, the BlackBerry company. Between the iPhone being announced with all the features and being launched, there was all these things where was it RIM, the company that made the BlackBerry? I think
Research in Motion, yeah.
Research in Motion.
Canadian company, yeah.
I think the CEO was, you know, had some like serious like doubts about what was even technically like some of the things that Steve Jobs claimed on stage were you know, like, to him they were like technically impossible, and you know, it turned out to be not true, for whatever reason. I won't go into that. I know there's a lot of political stuff around that, but yeah, I think that's one of the great things about seeing design in this broad sense, where you can't just say, it makes it harder for one person to say I'm a designer because I can design the UI of an app, right? Because if that's all you can do, then you're not really, you should be very specific about your title and say that I'm an app UI designer, because I can't do anything outside of those boundaries. Not that I think anyone is actually like that. I think they could be more open to, I feel like I'm digging myself a hole here, trying not to offend somebody.
I wouldn't worry about that. Like,
yeah.
we're not holding back.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, like I think there is this liberating thing, a sense of liberation in separating design from the skills of making the thing that you're designing. I think it kind of reminds me of the last thing I'm going to say. It reminds me of a documentary about the architect Frank Gehry, where he's kind of conceptualizing buildings, and he's just like, there was a scene, like, I don't like talking about these as examples of how people work, because it's, you know, it's obviously a highly edited documentary, but you know, there's this scene where he's kind of conceptualizing a building, and he's just like quickly cutting up pieces of cardboard and taping them together, and kind of standing back and like looking at it and saying, that's it, you know, that's right. And you know, that disregard for the technical constraints, although it's probably going to piss off a lot of the engineers and the people who have to build the thing, it still results in you know, his signature of making these, you know, these spectacular buildings that that become kind of monuments in themselves. And I don't think everybody can be like that, but on to certain degrees that I think they can, right? And to me, that's what design really is. Yeah. Thoughts?
I mean, it's I think something that it's funny that Steve knows it's one of my pet peeves, is the word technical reserved for people who do programming, for example. And as if other professions don't have technique, as if there's no technique in design. People just like hack it. And even like when we say, like when you say that we don't have the technique, like many people don't feel they have the technical skills to resist, to challenge, to obstruct unlawful behavior, immoral, all this behavior from, say, technology. The thing is, it should not be, the question is less important if it is technically a problem, but it's a human problem. And as long as you're human, you should be able to object to something. It should not be. That's why I think this is a problem of the way we narrativize the reality of technology today. That it is so abstracted away from the human reality of living everyday life, that like somebody who has not lived in this generation, like a 70-year-old person, who be like so lost, I don't know how to even, I don't know anything about how computers work. The thing is, if you have to know about computers work and then decide to use something, that's already a design problem. That's a bad design itself. That means that it's no longer a human thing only. And then even if it is, even if somebody objects, say in the case of Airbnb, you know, it was crazy what they did, letting people in the house. Everybody said that's not possible at all. Technically, it was completely possible. Technically, it's not a masterpiece, but they did this website very much. The difficulty was in the human level. And they made that possible with rhetoric, with marketing, with initially having people in countries wherever, like having their own people, whatever. And it was a humanly, that's why it made it success. And I think if there are problems to Airbnb, we should not think, or whoever is designer of the company, they should be more thinking of the human problems of, and I think it's the same for all technology, unless it's just you're building something that, like, I don't know how, if no, even that I was about to say, if you're designing the Bluetooth between your earphone and the thing, that's machine, even then that's a human ultimately. So I think one of the tragedies is that we have abstracted things, which is very useful, but to the point that we don't do the work. Then after, once you abstract building something, then you have to, I don't know, de-reify it back to the human level of understanding. So anybody could. So this is why the way we describe, like even like, let's say blockchain, which is something I work in. Most people say blockchain is a digital ledger. What the fuck is a ledger? Can we talk about it in a more human way? You know. And for some people it's a normal word, not for everybody it's a normal word. And there could be parallel competing meaning definitions, stories of the what is an Airbnb, what is Uber, or what is whatever, all these things, right? And I think having said that, I think another thing that happens connecting to the, and this might be tangent, but allow me, when we think of like design as being visual, I think what happens, especially, I mean, as a digital design of app and stuff, is because the physicality of the screen makes it visual. Because we are used to looking at a screen, look at a TV. So people think they're just making optical illusions all day long, that it's just TV. And there's a kind of a metaphysics that operates here, which is like almost like a media ecology thing, which is people who code, they're working with words. It's like, like with language, like programming language. And people who are designers, they're working with visual, with images. So it's like you could almost recast their job titles. It's not like technical people and designers, but rather saying you're like a linguist, like you are like a word person, linguistic verbal person, programmers, language person, and you are a visual person. And they live in these kinds of in their own spaces, right? So and it is completely uncontested, this thing. So this is why when you tell people that design is not visual, they're like, without awakening these media metaphors that is like so like cemented and people cannot question, without deconstructing this, it's super difficult to say. But why? Like even the idea that when somebody makes a new app, or there's this role called technical architect, which is somebody who basically figures out, like Vitalik Buterin would be a technical architect. Why is it not called the designer? Why is he an architect?
Yeah,
He's
right.
designing the system,
yeah.
right? Because it's not visual, right?
Yeah.
So because he's not working with images, he's working with languages. Either the language of mathematics, which is also a lot of economics is mathematics now, or the language of like coding, right?
Yeah.
And so I think something that is interesting to, or even when people do qualitative research, it's still like language, not. And I think it's a bad way of like separating the job like that.
Yeah.
And also the thing is, if design becomes something that either can be used for everybody or nobody, it's the same thing. If everybody gets to be designer, then regular people could be objecting to things because it's like design is not okay. Unless tangent, and tell me if I'm too philosophically far off.
No, go on.
There's a kind of a subject-object dichotomy at play. It is like designers design, and we are subjected to it. It's like we can never be the person agent who has agency at doing something about it. We will always be receiving it, and that's wholly problematic. It's wholly immoral, even I would say, and wrong. That's wrong because we are also making a lot of choices when we use a thing. And though, like when we use Airbnb, the way I use not exactly the way you use. Simple app like that.
Yeah.
So we are also, design is never a one directional process. They design and I have only option to use it or not. No, it's a co-creative thing. Like they initiate the process, but I fulfill it in the way I use it and abuse it. And that happens all the time. And I think so. Yeah, I think so there is the media problem, which I said about like thinking technical people work with words, language, and designers work with images. And the other thing is that like both technical and designers, they think they are the ones creating it and we're the ones receiving, consuming. But it's wholly untrue. We are not just passive agents, we're human beings. We're not robots.
So that, to me, that just means that our narrative of design is just wrong. And as users, as consumers, maybe we have to switch it to include ourselves as part of that process as well, right? Not kind of like separate, like the designer and the user, which is what's happening now, but kind of merge the two together.
It's kind of like saying that there's design, but there's not designers, right? Like you can't be, because everything that goes into making and using something is somehow contributing to its design. But to single out a person or to single out some of the people in that ecology, and call them designers would be unfair to the others.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of that, Anush?
Yeah.
I use the word
Yeah,
ecology
and I think,
for your
yeah, I know.
attention.
I saw you. That's a favorite word. Exactly. One of my favorite words, along with Spock. And yeah, and I think that if we there's a problem with the narrative of technology even and the narrative of even like business, I would say. It sounds very broad because the idea that some people make some things, other people use something, these makers and users, just a bad dichotomy. It's never like that. And also, as long as we are only seen as users, it's belittling of a human being. I'm not just a user. I'm much more than that. Like when you are in relationship with somebody, say with my wife, nobody's using anybody,
Mm.
you know.
Mm-hmm.
Like I would hate to know that because if I am just a user to Airbnb, they are just using me. Being a user of a tool that somebody creates ends up making you as the one that is used at the same time. Like
Mm.
To Airbnb, like I am the tool, you know, so that they need to make more money,
Yeah.
or whatever they need for scalability and engagement and all that stuff. And so this is why maybe even the word consumption it can be rethought because we talk about consumption economy, but when you consume a food, you always shit. And we never talk about the shitting aspect of consumption. And we do shit. This is why when we have an iPhone or something old, we don't know what to do with it anymore. It's like it was there to consume. Nobody thought about what happens when the consumption is done. This consumption, what is one dimensional, is one directional. There's no like, it's not part of the cycle of like, life. So I think, yeah, I think that's also interesting to think like, how would it be if we think of ourselves as users? Sorry, yeah, I made the mistake. Sorry, mistake. As designers, and how can we design the stuff that we get? Like, because we also design our life based on what we buy and stuff, how we decorate our lives. Because
Mm.
everybody's wallet is different. Everybody's the stuff in their pockets are different. Somebody puts their iPhone front pocket, back pocket. Somebody does an iPhone so that they can pick something else. And in their life, they have these three other apps that they always use. So we are making these choices all the time in our life to make our life humanly more beautiful, wonderful, livable, and durable, all that. So yeah, I think it gets really like the only place we have for those who we don't call designers who buy the shit is pretty miserable. The only place we have, the only option we have is just to buy.
So you're saying, just want to.
Maybe I went too vague. I don't know.
No, so you're saying it in a way that um, everything is designed to be a component of somebody else's design in a way, um, um, and that makes no difference whether what side of the what side of the coin you're on. I guess being a consumer or being a manufacturer or whatever. Like design doesn't care about that because like you say, like you buy the maybe you yeah the iPhone you choose is because of it's part of your design as like how you want to be seen, what kind of person you want to be seen as. You're designing your personal image.
I mean, that's basic like marketing, like using the brand to define your identity,
Yeah.
right? Like, yeah, what was that? Do you remember what was his name? Freud's cousin, the guy who invented PR.
Yeah, I forgot the guy. Yeah.
Yeah, so he created like this whole
Yeah.
theory of how basically like the products that you choose and the consumption you choose to engage in, you use it to fulfill your like unconscious desires, but really you're just like defining yourself in terms of how you want to be seen in the world, right? In relation to others. So yeah, for some reason that came to my
No,
mind.
exactly.
Talking
And
about that.
things have a value in relation to others. So only when you have a computer does the mouse pad become valuable to you. If you don't own a computer, you wouldn't buy mouse pads. And this is why things have a kind of a, everything is a kind of a familiar relationship with every object, other object. So for example, when you buy an IKEA table, you might end up buying some other things that fit with the table. And next thing you know, you decorate your house based on the table and the lamp or whatever you got. The one thing leads to 10 other things. So it's like we move from this kind of sectors of objects that are aligned to each other. So if you, once you buy a computer, as I was saying, you do the mouse pad, then you realize the chair is not good, you buy the chair, the kind of spinning kind of chair, you know, okay, have a carpenter, you put the band-aid thing. So it's like nothing exists in a vacuum by itself. This is why many things have value, sometimes not by itself much value, like what we do with the mouse pad, just simple looking thing, only in relation with other has a value. So, and we are the ones as users who are choosing which family to pivot to at any time, which family of objects. So no object, like objects also live in this world in a kind of a network of relations with each other in the way it gets used and consumed and so on. And this is interesting because this is Baudrillard's theory, and he called this network matrix, which is the inspiration behind the movie, The Matrix. But yeah, so yeah, sorry, no, go on. I went on this Baudrillard tangent. I like Jean.
You're on a first name basis.
Exactly. He doesn't know I exist, but anyway. And he's a kind of a misanthrope, so I don't think he would be interested in hanging out with me.
Yeah, I think the thing that got me on this train of thought was I was thinking about I had a moment where I was looking at reviews of one of my favorite design books by a designer, Victor Papanek, who was an industrial designer, so product designer. But his book, which was written in, I should have looked this up. I think it was written in the 70s. I just saw one of the reviews online. Called it interesting, but outdated or obsolete. Like his philosophies were obsolete, and that statement bothered me so much. Not because it was criticizing someone who I really respected, but just because I found it to be such a strange thing to say about a design philosophy, that it could be obsolete, as if the technology was the agent for design rather than people, right? Like it's like you're saying that everything we do when we design something is based around the technology, right? Rather than serving people.
That, to me, that just sounds like saying, oh, this art style is obsolete. But it's not
exactly,
the art
right?
style, it's obsolete. It's like someone said, like it's a trend. Like someone just decided that this is no longer, you know, a trend that is used, basically.
But okay. I think art style, but what about art like art, when you talk about art as like the message of a piece, right? Like the concept of a piece, can that be obsolete in the sense that, you know,
What do you mean by piece,
I guess
though? That's kind
well like what a single art piece, like yeah, I guess that's not really a good example.
it's abstract. Like, can you give a specific?
Well, I was thinking like,
you mean like a Van Gogh's painting would no longer be seen as worthwhile, like people wouldn't be like, oh my
well,
God.
no, like just that a single art piece, the intention is to make you feel something, right? The style is not related to that. Like it's a piece of art is intended to make you feel something, whether it's music or painting or sculpture or whatever. And I say that I say that to connect it with what I'm talking about when I say a design philosophy to me can't be obsolete, because we as people haven't changed. Like, we can't make something obsolete by time, because people now, I'm realizing flaws in this argument as I'm saying it. Not flaws that kill the argument, but flaws that add nuances to the argument. In that, over time, people don't change. Like, the environment changes, so our needs will change, but that means that the objects that we use and the things that are designed can become obsolete. But the philosophies behind them, right, should always be around solving problems, right? So how can solving problems, so regardless of what your design philosophy is, its core.
You mean is there a perennial design philosophy, something like that?
Okay. Let me try once again, one more time, to make this concise. Okay, using art.
But this reminds me more of math, actually. It's like getting to a certain solution, you use this, method, but now that method is kind of like no longer used. Like, it's agreed that this method is no longer used. Now we use this kind of method, this sort of theorem,
Yeah,
that's kind of what that reminds me. Not even art, but math.
But my art example, what I was trying to say was, every piece of art is kind of defined as art because its kind of core principle, the core philosophy behind it, is to make you feel something. Whatever direction or whatever kind of path you take to achieve that is something that's subject to the possibility of becoming obsolete due to changes in our environment and how we live and how we behave. So I compare that to in design, where it doesn't matter what your design philosophy is, it's kind of defined as design because the core of that philosophy is to solve problems for people, because that's what design is, right? Design is solving problems for people.
Is that what it was, though? Is it?
Is it? I don't know. I mean,
I don't know.
For people, yes. For people,
I think
yes.
you just contradicted yourself, though.
How so?
Because we were saying how it's design it's not like a Kantian kind of principle, like what Anuj was saying, backhand, front end. That's a very solving kind of mentality, but we agreed that it's more of like, a process, like almost like more of like a effective, visually appealing thing to make your life, better or more beautiful, as Anuj was saying. So I think
so I guess all right, I don't feel like I'm contradicting myself, so I guess I'm not explaining myself properly, right? What I said does apply to yourself as well, right? Like design is solving problems for yourself as a person, and it can be centralized.
It's like, too harsh. I think the problem frame.
Yeah, I think solving problems is probably not the right.
Solving problem also sounds like a bit too serious, because when you're in an IKEA store, it's not like the problem you have. You can, but not always, right?
Maybe it's more.
It happens in even those minute things also. It's like thinking law is only about crime. I mean, there's crime the law considers crime, but it's not about crime.
What about helping people do stuff? Helping people do something.
Do something. It's something. No one knows what it is, but something sounds shifty.
Yeah, because it really makes it clear that it doesn't necessarily have to be a good thing.
Can I ask you a question, Steve? Yeah. Maybe it'll help. If we do a hypothesis, do like a thought experiment of like cave, when humans were like lived in caves and stuff, and had like simple tools, like with stones and stuff. You would see they were designing the tools and the designing even more. Even before they were designing, humans have been designing the environment, like say with farming, changed the environment completely with farming, right? Like before people had different kind of, because I'm just going as far away from civilization as possible to make this thing like really what is at the core, like we even like did the thing of like having wild dogs, seeing which ones are the most like docile and slowly breeding it and making dogs is now, right? And you could say design. We did with cats much later, so they're still wild. And with farming, we did that because that, for example, you only had, say in the case of corn, only had like one or two of those little like individual corn just it's nothing. And then people, what is now known as Mexico, they just selected the ones that had more, and then finally we have lots of corn. So we did that. So and that's design. So you could say design is, if I may, kind of a civilizing process. And like anytime we don't want to craft an environment, the choices we take, how we go about it, there is some design. It's difficult to say which part is design and not, but the whole process has some like in the ethos something about design, and it could be anything. So I'm thinking maybe, and tell me and what you think. Maybe if there are no tools, there would be no design. There's to be at least some tool making, or it could be the environment could be a tool, like in the case of farming. It's not like, I mean, now farming is tool, but back in the day, they were just like selecting this plant is growing well. Let's do more of this particular plant. It's not like they had stuff to cut it, or even like with their bare hands. And you see that even with animals and stuff, because like ants make those things and bees make those things, and they're super intricate, right? We could say they don't have much choice, maybe because they do it predictively every generation, but I don't know. Maybe they have some. I don't know. And it's also anthropocentric to say they don't have. But I think, would you say you're saying something like that? I'm just trying to get design to something very like basic, simple, bare bones.
Well, I'm saying that um, man's first kind of tool making, or making fire, making a method for making fire. The principles.
Making a method of making fire. That's cool.
Yeah. I mean, well,
that's different from making a fire.
Yeah, and
I would say that is design. No. No, because when you invent something, you have to design it. Or design comes after the invention.
Event and design.
Like Einstein,
it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. It's
okay.
irrelevant.
Okay.
Because an invention is just it's just something that hasn't been done before, right? Like it's a new thing. But whether you're making something that has been done before or hasn't been done before, you're still going through a design process. Yeah, I think when you're defining the word invention, you shouldn't use the word design as some sort of kind of deciding factor. That's me being very blunt, but could be completely wrong. But that's how I see it. Sorry, before I complete what I'm saying, I think we should stop in 5 minutes, just so we make it a clean hour, as a kind of courtesy to anybody who decides to listen to this. Yeah, so what I'm trying to say is the philosophy behind man designing a way to have fire. To me, I can't see how that could become obsolete, because you're essentially using the same philosophies that you would use to make an app. What do you think of that? Like you could approach it in a way where you want make you just want to have a fire. So in that case, you're gonna take whatever you can and make a fire using the minimum amount of things available to you, to be as efficient as possible, because you just want a fire. But then you can talk about, then there would have been people who wanted bigger fires and who wanted to have, they found that their cave was being filled with smoke, so they needed to find a way to solve that problem. So other design philosophies would have had to have come into play, and those philosophies, based on whether it's designing a kind of fundamental need, or whether it's then building on the fundamental need to make something much more, adding features essentially. You're talking about design philosophies that shouldn't really change based on what you're designing, because then you're getting into a world where you're saying that design philosophies depend on the technology rather than the need. Does that make sense? Now I feel like anxiety from the time limit that I just put on myself by saying we should stop in 5 minutes. So I'm trying to make it as quick as possible, but now I wonder if I've just made it more confusing. Talk, someone.
For the answer to the question, please tune into the next episode.
Yeah, but let's try to. What are the takeaway points from today's podcast?
For me, I really, I don't know whether you guys got anything out of it, but I have a lot more to think about now. And to me, it's that design can be really, really big, or really, really broad, or really, really specific, and things that before I felt really passionately against or for. So things like what we talk about a lot, which is, UX design being a problematic concept. To me, the more I think about design, the more I can think about situations where I can understand why UX design is, and why some people accept it as it is. And that all comes down to whether you see design as this broad thing that we've been talking about, or whether you see it as the way it kind of is perceived by most people nowadays, as being this kind of visual, limited kind of role. So yeah, my takeaway is that the more I think about this, the less sure I am of things that I've thought in the past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my takeaway is that we have to change our narrative on design to make, the non-designers feel like they still have some sort of agency, that they don't necessarily have to be the designers to,
I like that.
To achieve like some sort of change or resistance.
I like that. I like that as a message of like something that we as a group would like to kind of work on, is changing the narrative of design.
Yeah, I don't have a theory, but hopefully that's something we can develop.
We'll get there
as we go.
Yeah. I think this is a good way to develop a theory. Mm-hmm. What do you think, Anuj?
I agree with you both.
Are you just saying that, or are you?
No. It's I'm not that snarky. No, it's true, because new narrative about design in a way that doesn't have to use technical jargons and stuff. That is just like, if technology is supposed, or software is supposed to keep the world. Something Steve said something very nice about that, which is, are we supposed to hear that and be like, is it a good news, or should we be scared? Like, and it's never clear with that statement. Like, are we supposed to shit our pants now that it's eating the world? I'm like, yay! Software is everywhere, every corner. Thank God we will be saved now. Which one? We don't know. And I think That is the story right now. We're telling ourselves better, the design better be super human in a way, like that completely takes away all the extra layer of technical abstraction that is necessary, of course, to build stuff, but can take away at least designers. And then it's like to see, yeah, this is the metaphor, to see a work of art like GST's performance. We realize that we are moved in orbit. We don't have to know how films are made. We don't have to know all the theories behind it to be able to critique it and say, I fucking hate this movie.
Mm.
Doesn't make any sense, you know. You might know it and have a different way of interpreting it, but you don't need to. But in technology, is anybody who wants to say, "Oh, I don't like that," you don't take enough, you know. If
Mm.
only movie watchers were told, unless you have a degree in cinema, you better watch this movie because you don't know what you like. It's like that. Of course, that's not the case, right? So I hope it could become in that way that everybody can participate in this conversation.
Cool.
Cool.
Yeah. Everybody's a designer.
That's the takeaway
Designer.
message. So
Exactly.
remember, folks, you too are a designer.
Yes.
Exactly.
And there's no such thing as a designer as well. You're a designer,
Okay.
and there's also no such thing as a designer.
Ooh.
Just design.
That sounds like a Zen qual.
Very
Like
zen. Very
concept.
zen.
Very
Yeah.
Zen. It's like contradiction, paradoxes, 101.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. That was great.